Just coming back to the part from the last video around creating the indentations for the tracks in the object. And hopefully this time I can make a recording without notifications popping up inside of the screencast recording. I missed a very obvious way of doing this in the last video, and it just didn't occur to me at the time. So we're going to have another shot at that. Also going to show another quick way of resizing without having to reset the origin and all this kind of stuff. So start again with our cube here. We're going to shrink it down to a more reasonable thickness. Important thing to note is the pivot point. This controls where your actions kind of take place from, and maybe this sounds a little bit weird, but it'll become hopefully clear in a moment. So at the moment it's set to the pivot point is the active element. So effectively this becomes the origin of this object. And that's where if we do well, let me show you. I'll turn off the, what is this one called again? I'll turn off the snapping. If we have it set to the active element and we scale along the z-axis, we're actually scaling around the origin of this object, which is this orange point here. We don't really want to do that because it means that the bottom of our object changes and so does the top. We're only really interested in the top, right? If the bottom changes, and we've got to like move it back to the ground plane again. So let's not do that. Instead we'll change it to the 3D cursor, which at the moment is right on the origin of the scene at 0, 0, 0, and that's actually kind of where we want to resize around. So let's scale again along the z-axis, but this time see, it's actually just kind of shrinking down from the opposite side because it's scaling around that 3D cursor. Let's try and take it down to 0.4. No, that's too much. 0.2. It's quite a thin slice. And that's just about right. That's kind of where we want to have it. So, just to keep in the same spirit of the last one, so we moved it up there. Now we're going to go back to trying to do these loop cuts. Okay, so, edit mode. Control R. Now we're going to again loop cut around this plane, and 0.8 was about right, so let's do that. Let's do another loop cut, again in that kind of axis, 0.8 but negative. Another one, and maybe let's try 0.7, doesn't mean, yeah, 0.75, that could be about right. Again, if you're doing this for real, you probably want to get this, you probably want to take exact measurements and put these in the right places, but I'm just going to do this for the sake of making an example. So this is where we got up to, and we tried to do a negative extrude, so actually kind of extruding inwards towards the object. I'm going to do this a different way, and you'll see it actually was tantalizingly close. We're just going to select all of the other faces on that side and instead extrude outwards. Probably don't want to have snapping turned on though, that's going to make things a little bit complicated. So extrude, let's say 0.2, is that too much? 0.15, kind of hard to tell without exact measurements. But you can see like that was actually pretty dead simple. And probably has about the same effect. But if we'd wanted to do this with the boolean modifier, we'd have to probably be a little bit more careful about creating that other cube with the right dimensions. If it's just a cube, the boolean modifier is not going to make the geometry really... In fact, the geometry will probably be a little bit simpler because you see these two sides will probably end up not being split apart. It will create some new geometry along these track grooves, but nowhere else. So also this face would probably be, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate faces, it would still only be a single face. So that's the advantage in that case of using the boolean modifier. In this case, maybe it's a little bit simpler to do, but we end up with a little bit extra geometry. But you know, this is only 92 triangles, 46 faces, 92 edges, 48 vertices. It's not a huge amount, so it's not anything we really need to worry about. And I'm sure the 3D printer probably doesn't care either. So, next step. I mean, we're basically done here. This is the point I wanted to make. What we didn't quite cover is making like these edges a little bit nicer. We can apply a beveled edge with -B, and I mean I can kind of use the mouse to try and make this a little bit nicer, but it's not really coming off. So the best thing to do with this is just set it manually, and I think I've played around with some settings before. About 0.05 feels like about right, and 5 segments, which means you end up with, I'll just zoom in so you can see it, you end up with 5 new faces instead of 1. Profile could probably be a little bit nicer though. I guess 0.5 is about right. There's a few other settings which probably aren't too useful for this particular thing. Yeah, how far into that side it extends. 0.03, yeah, that's probably about right. Okay, so that's a nice smoother edge rather than the hard edge we had before. If we just press Control B on the other edges, we just get exactly the same settings. So that's quite nice. Probably a faster way of doing this, but this seems fast enough for the moment. There we go. And then again, if we just render that quickly, well, the camera needs to be a little bit closer in, but you can probably, well, let's just go to the camera just quickly. Get a nicer zoomed in, get rid of that pane. Slightly more zoomed in render, just so that we don't get a really blocky image. Let's try that. Incidentally, I think maybe you might have caught it before. Okay, let's zoom out here. I think in one of the other images it looked like the corner was being cut off, which probably meant that the camera was a bit too close to the object. There's a clipping setting which is usually set to about 0.1 blender units. If the camera is 0.1 blender units or closer, then it'll actually start to cut off parts of the geometry. But this looks about right. So you can see the edges are a little bit smoother. Lighting's not amazing, but anyway, that's one potential way we could have done that, and that gives you another tool in your tool belt, not just around using boolean modifiers, but you can actually use the loop cut tool instead. So hope that's useful for you.